that the church issued an official condemnation of the slave trade in 1839 and of slavery itself in 1888, the church's prior cooperation and activities were a major factor in the expansion and normalization of slavery during the time of the colonial era. It took far too much time to create a position that is truly uncompromising in opposition to human bondage. Papal bulls lay the foundation. At a time when European exploration was gaining momentum in the 15th century, Pope Nicholas V issued 2 papal bulls that paved the way for the Catholic Church to become involved in the practice of slavery. Both Dum Diversas and Romanus Pontifex authorized Portugal and Spain permission to convert non-Christians taken captive at sea into slaves. This provided a religious foundation for future colonization, which supported the enslavement of native people and encouraged greater colonization of the lands that were explored. Priests and taxes profited from human cargo. During the early days of the transatlantic slave trade, it was common practice for priests to accompany slaving expeditions, where they assisted in the selection of captives and baptized them. The church made direct financial gains from the transatlantic slave trade through the collection of tax slaves from each captive that was bought and transported across the ocean. The church contributed to the massive growth of the slave economy in the colonial era through the actions described above, defending slavery as part of divine order. The Catholic clergy in the Americas defended slavery on the basis of theological doctrine as plantation economies developed across the continent. They portrayed slavery as being part of God's design and contended that as a result, slaves had a responsibility to follow their owners. Despite the fact that uprisings were frequently denounced, very little effort was made to preach against the evil of slavery. A significant amount of slaves belonging to church ownership. The Jesuits were one of many religious organizations that actively participated in the transatlantic slave trade by running sugar plantations in South America that relied on the labor of enslaved people. Slave transport was made possible by port infrastructure that was under the power of commands. Collectively, the church rose to prominence as one of the major slaveholders in countries such as Brazil. Uncertain steps towards the abolition of slavery. The popes and bishops of the Catholic Church did not begin to issue harsh condemnations of the slave trade until the 19th century. However, the acts focused on prohibiting Christian slavery rather than completely denouncing the institution of slavery. Slaves who managed to escape received very little material assistance. Some members of the clergy opposed abolition in order to safeguard the rights of slaves owned by the church, a failure of moral principles and a trace of complicity. The moral principles of the Catholic Church include protecting human dignity and rejecting unjust treatment of people. These ideas form the foundation of the Catholic Church. On the other hand, when it came to the institution of slavery, it displayed a failure to live up to these beliefs through not only its words, but also its actions. Despite the fact that early papal bulls gave the church's blessing and encouragement for the enslavement of non-Christians, it took a surprisingly long time for the church's position to fully evolve to an explicit rejection of human bondage on moral grounds. This was due to the fact that the church first gave its approval and encouragement for the practice. Instead of taking a definite stance against slavery from the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, the church maintained permitting the practice and benefited financially from it. This was the case even after the transatlantic slave trade had begun. The church, over a period of many decades, placed a higher importance on retaining the considerable economic privileges it received from slavery, rather than tackling the fundamental violation of human rights that defined the institution. This resulted in the situation that we see today. Through both the direct collection of taxes on the transportation of enslaved peoples and the establishment of the church as one of the greatest slave owners through the ownership of church-run plantations and property that included title to slaves, the church amassed a significant financial interest in the maintenance of the slave economy. Because of this, the church was unable to take a position that was truly principled and abolitionist. This was because a condemnation of slavery represented a threat to the wealth of the church. Do tell us your thoughts in the comments below regarding this power exploitation. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon.